preventing genocide. The word genocide was coined by a Polish Jew, Raphael Lemkin, who championed the cause of the Jews. As all of us know, nearly more than 6 million Jews were massacred by the Nazi regime, and then there has to be a distinction between a massacre, between killing, extrajudicial killing, between crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. It was this great man, Raphael Lemkin, who coined this word, genocide. And after that, across the globe, there has been a campaign in very many parts of the world. Genocide never again. To prevent genocide, we say genocide never again. But has genocide stopped? Have we been able to prevent genocide? Africa, as all of us know, very many genocides have taken place, including the famous Rwandan genocide. It has taken place in Europe, in the eastern parts of Europe. Recently, there was a genocide in Sri Lanka, where even to this day, 146,679 people are unaccounted. So in this context, the victims of genocide are here from different places. And then are we being able to take this message of stopping the genocide or preventing genocide from happening? So to listen to more on this topic, the first speaker for the day is Ms. Nilanthi Kanapati Pillai, who's a doctor and a human rights activist from Australia.
Okay. I wanted to give some background into the conflict in Sri Lanka because I think it's important to give some perspective, and there's little to no mainstream media footage, nor any sort of reliable, non-biased documentaries about Sri Lanka's very bleak history. So I've had to do my research to educate myself. There's no acknowledgement, let alone initiation of any reconciliatory processes by the Sri Lankan government, and I've had to rely on very old sort of BBC footage from documentaries and some mobile phone footage and sort of scrapped it together. Most of you would associate the 1983 riots with the commencement of the war between a Sinhalese majority and a Tamil minority in Sri Lanka. But in all honesty, it began some 40 years prior with British colonialism of Sri Lanka. So during the time, Mahatma Gandhi sought peaceful, non-violent, non-cooperation as a means to overthrow the British government and ultimately won independence for India. Then with the independence of Sri Lanka, the departing colonial masters, Britain, hand the reins of power to the Sinhalese majority. The modern-day nationalism of the Sinhalese then is a completely colonial construct, and it has gone on for decades prior to the actual war. And just like any dictatorial government or race that's given power, the Sinhalese embrace this construct, saying that, you know, we are supreme in every way possible, so historically and physically. Therefore, the non-Sinhala, non-Buddhist communities have long been treated as second-class citizens, ever since independence, basically. In 1948, Tamil plantation workers were deprived of citizenship. In 1956, Sinhalese was made the sole official language of Sri Lanka, and that's denying the Tamil language equal status. So long prior to the 1983 riots, Tamil minorities have struggled largely voicelessly for the same opportunities in employment, education, power, politics, etc., and up to now, really. So up-and-coming generations slowly started to resist, peacefully initially, but any resistance from the Tamil people have been met with brute force. So 1983 marks the beginning of the outright armed conflict between the nationalistic Sinhalese and the largely oppressed Tamil minority. So the war officially dates 1983 to 2008, and in that time period there was over 10,000 documented Tamil deaths, but this doesn't include the up to 70,000 documented killed in the final year of 2009, especially in the last 138 days. So 83 struggling Tamil youths form the Liberation Tamil Tigers of Elam, and this is called a terrorist organisation by the Sri Lankan government, and this is what's shown in the media. So you have footage of armed child soldiers as young as 12 and suicide bombers and women, girls, any means to fight back, basically. So it's just a brutal but forced reality out of sheer desperation. And there injects a profound sense of solidarity, nationalism, and also this strange sense of martyrdom amongst Tamilians. It is temporarily effective in bringing about a ceasefire, and peace agreements are negotiated in 2002, but the world is looking at the LTT as a ruthless terrorist organisation that's, brutal enough to recruit children, women, and suicide bombers. 2015 in November, Sri Lanka gets a new president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was initially a human rights lawyer, and he supported families of revolutionary Sinhalese nationalists whose relatives had died or disappeared during a government terror campaign during the late 1980s. Once in power, however, he starts using exactly the same tactics, or worse, to consolidate his position. And exactly like the current leader of the First World today, Trump, instates members of his own family in power, including Defence Secretary, and placing several other family members in positions of power. So with this unchallenged ceiling of his political powers, then Rajapaksa goes about combining hardline, singular, ultra-nationalist rhetoric with a very enthusiastic adoption of the West language, using the phrase, okay, we're conducting a war on terror, on a very terrified and desperate minority. So he launches a full-scale military attack on the Tamil population from both the air and the ground, and this time with the force of the army, the police and political vigilantes behind him, and seeks out to wipe out what he's painting to the world as a dangerous terrorist organisation. So Tamils fight back using whatever desperate means they can. So the escalation of this fairly unilateral war in the late months of 2008 involved full-scale military airstrikes with open fire on a very shrinking Tamil population, which fled to the government's enforced safe zone, which was supposed to provide a sanctuary for them. And this was in the country's northeastern coast. So this is entirely premeditated with US knowledge. We've got leaked diplomatic cables reveal exchanges between the US Embassy in Colombo and the State Department in Washington, which in 2009 ordered all United Nations expats to urgently evacuate the country's north, where all the LTT and civilians are compressed. So basically to ensure that all independent witnesses to what was going to ensue are removed. So it's particularly diabolical and premeditated that the Sri Lankan government declares a no-fire or safe zone in the country's north, and then for the thousands and thousands of Tamil civilians in the LTTE which surrender and condense in this area in the north, Sri Lankan military fire directly into villages and raid homes amidst aerial shelling in the north. So we have mobile phone footage of screaming families digging trenches outside their homes that's wide enough and deep enough for single rows of adults, mothers and fathers, children, babies, and they all lie horizontally, like below grass level, to try and escape direct gunfire. So this is actively targeting unarmed civilians who have already surrendered. So it's not a conflict, it is outright genocide, with the aim of leaving no living witnesses. There's been a systematic and deliberate barring of any mainstream media coverage of the war, nor any independent third-party investigations allowed into the multiple allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Thank you, Nilanthi. The second speaker is Mr. Akram Gizabi, who is the chairman of the World Hazara Council. He was a former journalist working with the Voice of America and a political activist from Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the World Hazara Council, I have the honor to speak to you today. I would like to first sincerely thank the organizers of this auspicious gathering, who has given me the opportunity to speak to you. The Hazaras have endured at least 2 attempts in Afghanistan and another in Pakistan, a genocide, in the last 100 years. During the reign of Abdul Rahman in 1890s, which was brought to power by the British Raj, about 62% of the Hazara population was massacred. Their lands were confiscated and given to Pashtuns from outside the border. Their properties plundered, their women, girls, and boys were sold to slavery. The Amir, also known as the Butcher, wanted to get rid of some of the ethnic groups, mainly the Hazaras, on the basis of their ethnicity and religion. Large swaths of land were cleared of these people. After the systematic massacre and deportations, those who survived left Afghanistan to neighboring countries, where a large population now lives in Iran and some in Quetta, Pakistan. They were also scattered throughout the region in places that only recently we came to know. For the next century, the Hazaras suffered all kinds of discrimination and marginalization. They were barred from education, the economic opportunities were denied to them, and their presence in the government was almost non-existent. Each year in the spring and summer, the Pashtun nomads go to graze on their land, and they are put under extreme pressure to leave their lands. In 1998, almost 100 years later, again they were subject to genocide in the city of Mazar-Sharif. When the Taliban took over the northern province of Balkh, they murdered between 12 to 18,000 people, mostly men and boys. And they also took some women and men hostage, most of whom are not accounted for. Once again, due to the nature of the crimes, the violence against Hazaras in the north is akin to genocide. After the massacre of 1890s, those Hazaras who went to Pakistan settled in the city of Quetta. They had a rather normal life until the emergence of the religious fundamentalists that had the support of the Pakistani government. Since 2011, more than 1,500 attacks and target killings have taken place, and not one person has been apprehended. In the words of Pakistan Director of Human Rights Watch, Ali Dayan Hassan, the government inaction suggests that it was indifferent to or even supported the extremist violence. The Pakistani authorities, he said, are just indifferent bystanders to slaughter at best, or callously supportive of those perpetrating these massacres at worst. This is a crisis that neither Pakistanis nor the world can afford to ignore anymore. Unquote. The situation in Quetta became so desperate that on November 19, 2012, a conference in UK House of Parliament was held under the title of Hazara Genocide, in which more than 20 MPs and a member of the House of Lords took part, and some spoke about the situation. Later, a parliamentary group made up of more than 20 MPs from 2 major parties were formed in support of the Hazaras in the House of Commons. Another conference was held on Hazara genocide in Pakistan, challenges and solutions, in Gothenburg, Sweden, in which scholars and human rights activists from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Norway, Sweden took part. They also concluded that Hazaras were systematically subject to genocide. Fortunately, the conference in British Parliament helped ease the Hazara killing, but only to be started a few years later. What is the problem today, and why are we concerned about the situation? Since the downfall of the Taliban, the situation has changed dramatically. Not only the Taliban have grown stronger and bolder, their supporters and sponsors have also become more active. The war in Syria has changed the politics of the region, and there are lessons to be learned and concerned with it in dealing with Afghanistan. The emergence of ISIS in Iraq and Syria brought a new dimension to the situation in the region, and there are increasing signs that they want to move to new territories, and Afghanistan is a prime objective for their adventure. In fact, they have already moved to certain areas of the country from which they organize operations against civilian targets in the cities. The defeat of ISIS in Syria, and especially in Iraq, gave them an opportunity to reconsider their strategy and move to a new theater to face off and to settle the scores that were left unfinished and unfulfilled in the Middle East. Since at least 2 years, the ISIS targets religious gatherings and places of worship. In numerous bombings, we have lost hundreds of lives. Nowadays, Kabul and other major cities are so dangerous for our people that a person leaving his or her house is not sure whether he or she would return alive. ISIS is a terror group. If they get established as a major force in the region, like they did in Iraq and Syria, where they control territories, the problem will exacerbate, and it's them that we are concerned with and worry about. The treatment of religious minorities, such as Christians and Yazidis in Syria and Iraq, has raised alarm about the fate of religious minorities in Afghanistan. The Hazaras have all three of the major Islamic sects, namely the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Ismailis. We are also the most vulnerable when it comes to religious extremists. Even now, the two threats, namely of the Taliban and the ISIS, have made life extremely dangerous, especially for intellectuals and social activists who are constantly under threat. To prevent another genocide in Afghanistan, it will be essential to empower and strengthen the local communities. The people of Afghanistan are willing and able to defend themselves if they are given the help and support that they need. It will be a disaster to let the terrorists and extremists take over and then try to rescue the victims and those who need help. Limited presence of the United Nations and international forces will give a false hope, and their inaction will create a Srebrenica-type disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Akram, for highlighting the genocide of the Hazaras. The next speaker is Mr. Hassan Abba, who is a human rights activist from the occupied Western Sahara.
Good afternoon. My name is Mahfoud Ahmed, sorry.
Yeah,
my name is Mahfoud Bashri, and I'm actually from Western Sahara, yes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak here on behalf of my people, on behalf of silenced people and forgotten people who are still suffering and still struggling to gain and to have the right to to independence, to self-determination, and can finally live free in their homeland, Western Sahara. So actually, I will start to give you a very brief introduction about Western Sahara. Doesn't know, because basically in Western Sahara, unfortunately, many people doesn't know, don't know about us because of the silence, because of the media siege and blockage that we are suffering. That unfortunately, this cause and this struggle is not seen on the international scene. So Western Sahara is a country in Northwest Africa, and now it's also known as Africa's last colony, because basically all the African countries got the right, their inalienable right to choose their fate and choose their future through referendums or through an independence process. However, for Western Sahara, that was not the case. Western Sahara was colonized by Spain for almost more than 100 years, and then Spain, in a shameful way, abandoned this territory, giving it to, or making an illegal treatment called Madrid Treatment in 1975, in which they withdraw from the territory and they give it to Morocco and Mauritania. And this agreement was declared illegal because it doesn't respect the right of this population, of these people, to live or to express their will through a transparent and fair referendum. So after Spain withdrew in 1975, in that shameful way, as I said, and we still consider Spain as responsible for all the suffering and for all the very difficult situation in that the Sahrawi people is still suffering today. When Spain withdrew in 1975, it gave space to both Mauritania and Morocco. Actually, Mauritania withdrew as well from the war with Sahrawis, represented by their only and legitimate representative Polisario Front in 1979. So Morocco actually is the one and only occupying power now in Western Sahara. Sahrawis defended themselves for more than 16 years, launching an armed struggle against this occupation. And actually in 1991, the UN intervened and led a peace process in which they promised the Sahara people to be given the opportunity to choose their future and their fate through a self-determination referendum. Unfortunately, this didn't happen until today. So I'm getting back to to the topic of our side event, to the genocide. In 1975, Sahrawis suffered a true and really brutal genocide by Moroccan occupation when they first entered, claiming that they entered through a green march to, as they said, as the Moroccans said, to take back their land, Western Sahara. This occupation was done in a brutal way through attacking the civil population, attacking children and women, and the very pacific and civil population who had to flee from their homeland, seeking for refuge and seeking for a safe place where to stay. Moroccan occupation started this brutal intervention and brutal attack against the Sahrawi population in 1975 and during 1976 as well, where Sahrawis were bombed with napalm, with phosphor, and with other internationally banned weapons. And many Sahrawis are still suffering from the consequences of these attacks and of these weapons which were used during the intervention and during the annexation by Morocco to Western Sahara in 1975. So many people died through that, in the beginning of the Moroccan occupation due to that genocide.
which was undertaken by the Moroccan army and the Moroccan forces against the Sahrawi civil population. You can see some pictures in the presentation about Sahrawi civil population attacked Sahrawi children and Sahrawi women who were attacked with napalm and phosphor and other weapons. And as I said, some families and some Sahrawis are still now living the consequences of this of that attacks by Moroccan forces. Now more than 500 Sahrawis are still disappeared. Still nobody knows about them, and now still also having people with chronic illnesses and with illnesses due to that severe attacks by Moroccan army. As I said before in my very first introduction, after 1991, UN led a peace process in order to organize a referendum of self-determination for the Sahrawi people. This referendum was supposed to take place 6 months or even one year after that promise in 1991. However, it was clear to everyone that Morocco agreed to that plan only because they were defeated in the war, but also in order to gain more time so they can search or seek for another way on how to keep the control over Western Sahara. Unfortunately, 27 years after, we're still pending, we're still waiting for this self-determination referendum to be held by the UN. We have a mission for the UN in Western Sahara called MINURSO, the United Nations mission to organize a referendum in Western Sahara, and this mission not only failed or not only was not able to organize self-determination referendum, but also this mission has not a mandate to monitor a human rights situation. They are totally blocked by the Moroccan occupation, and actually Sahrawi population is controlled, is 100% under the control of the Moroccan forces and the Moroccan occupation, and still right to now we still Sahrawi population occupied territories of Western Sahara are still suffering from these brutal interventions from Moroccan police, Moroccan army. The last attack against the civil population was yet 3 or 4 days ago, when the UN envoy to Western Sahara, former German President Horst Kohler, visited the territory. Sahrawi population occupied territories went to the streets to demonstrate and to call for self-determination, for independence of Western Sahara. And this was faced by brutal attacks and brutal interventions by the police and by Moroccan army. And if you can see the last intervention against Sahrawi population, as I said, was 3 or 4 days ago, and this is still Moroccan occupation still keep undertaking this brutality and this attack against human rights, and especially human rights defenders in Western Sahara, those who claim independence and who claim the right to self-determination, who are the majority in occupied Western Sahara. Morocco keep silencing them and keep imposing this media blockage so that international community, so that people outside, so that the media can't have access, they're unable to have access to this territory, and therefore they cannot report or they cannot give us or give to the world the image of what really is happening in this land. Only last year, more than 100 international observers and member of press were denied to enter Western Sahara because and they were denied by the Moroccan forces. So this gives us the image that the population, the Western Sahara population, are living under military occupation, and they are subject to all violations of human rights. And still, what we really see unfortunate is that the international community has failed to do anything, has failed to organize a self-determination referendum for the Sahrawi people. But not only that, international community are turning a blind eye about all the violations and all what's happening up to the date in Western Sahara. And still here in the Council and other places, we see Morocco trying to give a good and brilliant image about the human rights situation in Morocco at the time where they force and they face civilians and Sahrawi population with all types of human rights situation. So people in the occupied territories are targeted. Women are targeted because they are leading this peaceful and resistance and this peaceful struggle for self-determination of the Sahrawi people. Children also are targeted in the occupied Western Sahara. The last case was the case of a child called Ayub Al-Ghan, who is now hospitalized in Moroccan hospital and who was shot by Moroccan police car in the last demonstrations and the last protest that Sahrawi population led when the host scholar, the UN envoy, visited the territory 3 or 4 days ago. So this is briefly the situation of human rights in Western Sahara. This is also a quick image about the genocide that Moroccan occupation undertook 42 years ago, and also in 2011 when the Sahrawis protested and got out of the capital of Western Sahara, Al-Ayun, to protest against Moroccan occupation, setting up a camp to protest. This also was brutally dismantled by Moroccan forces in 2011, the famous camp of Gdeymizik. So where in general Sahrawi population are under siege, under brutal Moroccan authority that is occupying their land and that denies them to express themselves, and also trying to give another image to the international community and to the world. I thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Maha Ramakrishnan. She's an advocate and a human rights activist from Malaysia.
Thank you. The conflict in the island of Sri Lanka is actually the national question. A lot of people think that the conflict is the 2009 war, but actually the conflict started just after independence, when British, from their colonization, they passed it to the Sinhalese colonization of the Tamil nation. And when we look at the conflict, we think there are two parties to the conflict. One is the so-called state of Sri Lanka, and then the other side is the Tamil Eelam, the de facto state of Tamil Eelam. But actually there are many parties to the conflict, because when we look at the history from 1948 and more, just before the war, during the peace process, we can see that US, UK, Norway, the Royal Norwegian government, Japan, all these countries took part in the peace process, and they kind of steered which direction the conflict must take. And every time there was a bias against LTTE, because they equated whatever minor mistakes that LTTE did, they equated it with major injustices that were done by the Sri Lankan government. So even, like, for example, they say that the LTTE had child soldiers, but actually the international community tried to portray that LTTE sent children to combat, but that was not the case. And so the thing that we think that there are two parties to the conflict is actually misleading. Okay, India also played a major role in the war, so we should not be surprised that in 2009, when there was a war, UN did not do anything to protect the people. They did not invoke the right to protect, because even before the war, there was a bias against LTTE. So during the war, the international community basically did everything in their power to allow Sri Lanka to have its victory. And all this, if you look at the Permanent People's Tribunal in Dublin and in Bremen, they discussed about the involvement of US and UK and all that. So far there has been no investigation about how India is involved. And so even now, what happens is like after the war, now it's already 9 years after the war, the genocide continues. But every time there's a UN representative who goes to Sri Lanka, they just turn a blind eye to the genocide. Even like they sent Navi Pillai to Sri Lanka. They used a Tamil herself to go to Sri Lanka, and the people tried to tell her about the genocide, but somehow it was not brought out, and so they continue, and they want to impose the rehabilitation, reconciliation model that was used in South Africa for Sri Lanka, but that will not apply because in Sri Lanka right now, in the Tamil areas, it's heavily militarized. Certain areas there are one soldier for 2 Tamils. So you can imagine living in such an area, and and also soldiers taking part in all economic activities. They're also bringing fishermen from the south to fish in certain areas, giving them the license to fish in certain areas, and certain Tamil fishermen are restricted to fish in that area. And then they have military running preschools. Where in the world do you see military people running preschools? There are 6,000 preschools run by military in the Tamil nation. And also if you see the Standard 1 or Standard 2, the primary schools, if you go to the classrooms, you can see very few kids. Some of the schools, it seems, in the Tamil nation have very few kids because of the war. And also the population, the young population is dropping in the Tamil nation, because a lot of men, they were involved in the war, and then after that they've left the country as refugees, and also those who are there, they are injured, or so there's a lot of men who did not marry and have children as well. So that's another kind of genocide. And also, like for example, reducing the population itself. There are certain reports where in certain villages where Christian Tamil women were given some patches in their arms where, it's kind of, what is it? Contraceptive, yeah. Sorry? Okay, so contraceptive to prevent more birth of Tamil children, right? And so there are so many, the militarized, and also the land, right? Sorry, I'm going all over the place. Okay, the land has been, there's land grab of Tamil private land, and so far they've been giving back some of the land, and they still occupy a lot of the land. And when they give back a little bit of land, they make it like international news that they have returned some land. And even for them to give back the land, the military gets compensation, which does not make sense at all, because the military actually took private land from the Tamil people, and then to give back they have to be paid money. And also, whatever development that happens in the north and east is actually, when we travel there, we say, wow, there's KFC there now, and then we see the malls, It's actually not for the Tamil people there. It's so that they make it more attractive for the Sinhalese from the south to come and live in the Tamil nation, so that the fact that it's a Tamil land, the continuity of the land is broken up, just like how Israel is doing in Palestine, where they break up the land. They put Israeli settlements in between, so it's not one piece of land. The same way the Sri Lankan government is doing. They're bringing the Sinhalese and they're settling them in areas, and then they're having development so that they would want to come and live in the Tamil nation. So the Tamil nation, basically, the land is very dry, and they're doing all this development to bring the Sinhalese there. So because the land was very dry, the Tamils were actually, they kind of they concentrated a lot on education to get out of poverty. And even that has been, the genocide started in 1981 against education of Tamils, where they burned the Jaffna library. They were not happy with just burning the library. They even burned bookshops, even stationery shops. They wanted to make sure that, Tamils lost, all their books and everything. And slowly, if you look at now the condition of the schools in the Tamil areas, you can see it's in really bad condition. and with leaking roofs, and they just sit on the mud floor. I mean, this was if in the 1950s and 60s, Tamils were going to Malaysia and going to Singapore and going to so many other countries as educated people to work for the British. And now when you look at the refugees coming, I work with a lot of refugees in Malaysia. Some of them can't even read. They can't even read and write. It's like amazing. I mean, I don't know, because like the Tamils from Sri Lanka who are in Malaysia, most of them are well educated. I mean, even when they came from Sri Lanka. So the genocide continues for the education as well. And the most ridiculous thing that I said just now is about the military being in preschools. I mean, we are talking about a military that went to Haiti and raped children there. Okay, as part of the peacekeeping force, they raped small children. That was not just one or two cases, but there were many, many cases. And this was under the UN itself, they did that. And so you can imagine that, these children are exposed to the military. Apparently the military also play with the preschool children. They organize their sports and all that. And so right now the genocide is going on in many different ways. The names of the villages are changed into Sinhala. They just see that, this sounds something like this Sinhala word. Okay, now they change the name to that name. And then so they change the name, and then also language. For the students, Tamil students, they study Sinhala as their second language. Whereas for the Sinhalese students, they study English as the second language, the first language being Sinhalese. So they make the Tamil students even like education-wise not competitive to continue their further their education overseas, or to bring the Tamil people. Basically what they want to do is they want to make the Tamil people to become like servants to the Sinhalese in the Tamil nation, because by affecting their education, by affecting their livelihood, and then there are many mothers who also go and work in the military farms, and I mean, I have met some of them, and they told me that they suffer sexual assault in the farms, and if they are not friendly to the army, then they make life difficult for them. So that goes on as well. And a lot of Tamil women also, the widows, they left because of the war, the genocide. They left Sri Lanka. They came all over the world. Some of them in Malaysia. They just work as cleaners and all that to send some money to the children. So the family is also like broken up. So there's so many things that happen because of this genocide. And until the right of self-determination of Tamils is recognized, this genocide is going to continue. And until the international community see that, it is in their geopolitical interest to recognize this right of self-determination of Tamils, it will continue as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. The contraceptive which was inserted into the Tamils is called as Jadayam. Nearly 165 women were inserted with this contraceptive called as Jadel to prevent birth amongst the Tamils, and nearly 3 women died in the process. The last speaker, Jadel, that is pronounced as that's spelled as Jadel, Jadel. The last speaker for the day is Mr. Munish Mengal, who is the president of the Baluch Voice Association. He will speak on the Baluch issue, which is Baluchistan, as all of us know, is the largest province in Pakistan, and this province also suffers genocide that is being conducted by the Pakistani regime over the past 7 decades.
Thank you, Chairman. Also, thank you for elaborating the issue of Baluchistan. So, first of all, I highly endorse the statements of all the participants they have stated, because my land is a victim of all these curses which the distinguished guests they have spoken about it. First of all, when we say about religious terrorism, Quetta Shura Council, I think if anybody recalls it, it's a very well-known organization. That's the backbone of religious terrorist organizations. That is in my land, Baluchistan. Lashkar-e-Taiba, Lashkar-e-Jangvi, and then the killing of Taliban leader Mullah Mansoor, that was also done in Balochistan. And unfortunately, we saw the house of Osama bin Laden, which was just few yards away from the Pakistani military cantonment headquarters, that's called GHQ. In the same way, we find the dead bodies, the mass graves of our loved ones, just few hundred yards from the military cantonments in Balochistan. Whatever the distinguished guest said about Hazara people, so those are on my land. We are living over there as brothers, but the state and the organizations which have a support from the state, the world says then that non-state actors, but we see them, we know the realities that those are state-backed organizations. And unfortunately, all the perpetrators, they are well connected, whether they are in Africa or in Asia or in any part of the world, they are very well connected with each other. So they are helping each other in a very systematic way. Then coming to the Tamil massacres on their land, unfortunately, again I say, I have seen the pictures of the Pakistani army generals. They were present on the Tamils' land while they were doing military operations over there. And they were directing them, they were giving them guidance how to eliminate them. And this is what my people see on my land. We have seen military operations. We know how the military operation is done. They cordon off a whole region. They cordon off a town. They cordon off a valley, and then they start initially bombarding. And after the bombardment, then the artillery forces start moving ahead, and they kill indiscriminately the human beings, the children, the infants, the females, and even they kill the animals. We have seen the animals who are having shells in their body. They kill our sheep, our goats. I do not know why. And then whatever remains they get from that valley, those people are, unfortunately, we call them, those are victims of enforced disappearances, involuntary disappearances. We have seen many reports from Tamil that the thousands of people are missing. In the same way, thousands of people are missing from Balochistan. As per media reports, as per the reports of the civil society organizations, as per the, you can say, National Human Rights Commission reports, that more than 24,000 Baloch people are missing. And in their reports, the fingers are pointed towards the state security force. Even many evidences have been submitted to the courts that state security forces are involved in kidnapping or enforced disappearing the people. I myself was a victim of enforced disappearances, and I was there for more than 2 years, and I still remember that day, that when I was forced just to sexually harass a Baloch female. She was a school teacher only because of her views. Why we are victim of this? Because we hold an identity. We have our political views. All of us have their religious faiths. We hold language. We hold a culture. We hold values. And unfortunately, that state which was created over there, that is an artificial state. And that Islamic state which was created artificially on that land, and that is the nexus of terrorism, and from where the world, not only we people inside over there, also the neighbors, as I stated about Tamils, the Pakistani security forces were present on Tamil land. In the same way, the neighbors and also the world community, they have seen the attacks of those forces. So this is what I said initially, that they are very well connected, whether they are religious terrorist organizations or the state. Both of them are connected with each other. The states are very well connected in subjugating us, in suppressing us, and in systematically eliminating us. And another form of genocide, we are seeing it, that is just for economical purposes. Now the world sees that one belt, one road initiative, and the starting point of that is from Balochistan, from Gawad, and unfortunately again from my land. They are eliminating us. They are ashing our houses. They cordon off the valleys, they ashes houses because they need the land, they need the resources. That's why they are eliminating us systematically from our land with impunity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Munir. I now throw open the floor for questions. You don't have to tell us, no problem. I'm able to see. Yeah.
We have heard the suffering of all of you guys, and we share it. From Western Sahara, I was born in the refugee camps of Tindouf. I was wondering if you do as well suffer from demographic changes, that the occupier is changing the demographic population of the region that you're from. The question is for any one of you beside my colleague, since I already know his answer.
Can you repeat the question?
My question was about demographic changes. If in the region there are changing demographic from natives to occupiers, settlers.
Maybe I can answer in the case of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, if you see, under the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime, the soldiers were encouraged to resettle. When they started resettling, what they did is, they gave 5 acres of land free of cost. And for every third child the soldier has, they paid 100,000 rupees. And apart from that, if you look at the demographic changes that have happened in the Trincomalee district, 1881 census shows that the population of the Sinhalese was 3.3%. 1981, exactly 100 years later, if you see their population percentage from 3.3, it rose to 33. Whereas on the other side, the Tamils were around 64% in 1881. 1981, from about 64%, it reduced to 33%. So this, demographic changes are an integral part of conducting a successful genocide, and it's part of the structural genocide that happens in all these places where people fight for the right to self-determination. Any other question? Last one? No.
Gentleman there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the panel for their presentation, but I wanted to make a issue on the use of the word minority for Tamils. It's critical that we understand factually we are not minorities. We are indigenous people of the north and east of Sri Lanka. So if we were to label Tamils as minorities, it's effectively calling Scots, Welsh and the Irish in the United Kingdom as minorities, or even in India, whether you have Tamil Nadu and so on. They never use that word. It's not numbers. We are indigenous people, so it's important that we never use that word at all. Thank you.
I fully endorse your views. The Tamils are not a minority I don't know, one of the panel. I'm sorry we are short of time. I need to finish this panel. So as all of us have heard the different experiences and different stories of genocide occurring, and then the structural genocides that have been going on, we are very, very clear about the intent. When we use the word genocide, we also should be very clear of the intent of the oppressor. So the intent of the oppressor is very clear in all the cases, whether it is in Western Sahara or Tamil Eelam or in Afghanistan or in Balochistan. So it is here that we, part of the civil society, should stop oppressors and then make it a point to prove whenever time comes that what happens in our land is a genocide, and as all of us say, genocide never again. Thank you.